This week's blog post is the first of two on the Florence Griswold Museum. In the early 1800s, the town of Old Lyme on the Connecticut River near Long Island Sound was a prosperous shipbuilding center. But when steam-powered ships became common, the town turned into an agricultural backwater. By the 1890s, Florence Griswold, 1850 to 1937, was taking in boarders to pay for the upkeep of the large home she had inherited from her seafaring father. Henry Ward Ranger, who arrived in 1899, thought the Griswold home would be the perfect place for an art colony. Incidentally, another artist's colony was growing up in the 1890s around Augustus St. Gaudens's summer home in Cornish, New Hampshire. The next summer, Ranger returned to Old Lyme with a group of friends. The artist colony in the Griswold home lasted for about 2 decades. Among those who spent time at the School of Lyme were Childe Hassam, Edward Charles Volkert, and Willard Metcalf. Although residents came and went, Miss Florence fostered a sense of community by allowing them veto power over new artist boarders. The Griswold house was nearly razed during the Great Depression, but was saved by the newly formed Florence Griswold Association. It was opened as a museum in 1947. The FGA has gradually refurnished the house and acquired 12 acres of land, room for additional gallery spaces, and some gardens and walking trails. It's a lovely place to spend a summer day. The Griswold home's former parlor became the largest guest room. Another guest room was on the first floor, 5 more on the second. Those are now a series of galleries, and there were a number of small rooms on the 3rd floor. In all, Miss Florence had space for 16 boarders. After dinner, the artist boarders congregated in the parlor, playing card games and performing plays. Occasionally they would play the wiggle game, in which each artist had to try to incorporate 3 random wiggly lines into a complete humorous drawing. The Griswold house's most unusual feature is a series of paintings done on the first floor doors and on the walls of the dining room. It was an honor to be invited by Miss Florence to paint one of these panels. The doors and walls of the dining room bear 38 painted panels by 33 different artists, with subjects ranging from Lyme, Connecticut to Venice, Spain, and New York. In this corner of the dining room is William Howe Foote's Florence Griswold House by Moonlight, 1905, Bruce Crane's December Morn from 1921, and Thomas Watson Ball's Chinese Twilight. On the right is Arthur Hemming's Shooting Death's Rapids from 1906. Hemming, whose dates are 1870 to 1940, was a Canadian painter and a novelist. He was known as the Chronicler of the North. Being colorblind, he painted mostly in black and white. It's quite effective here. Below the dining room mantelpiece is a long, narrow painting by Henry Rankin Poor called The Fox Chase, which dates to 1901 to 1905. Reading from left to right, up at the top you can see the fox and the dogs, and then an array of painters who are caricatured as dropping their work to join the hunt. Toward the right are the painter's staples, a box of varnish, and a nearly empty bottle of rye whiskey. This is the varnish and this is the rye. And at the far right, over here, is the Griswold house. Poor changed the painting several times to reflect which artists were in residence at the boarding house. The final version includes 24 figures, all of whom are meticulously identified in the Griswold's literature. Soon the dining room panels were so renowned that Miss Florence was leading tours of them. She would conclude the tour with a genteel sales pitch in the hall, which served as a makeshift gallery for the boarding house artists. Painter William Chadwick, 1879 to 1962, was a resident of Old Lyme, although he didn't live in the Griswold house. His studio, moved to the Griswold property in 1992, shows a typical working environment for painters of the early 1900s. Although the Impressionists championed painting on-site outdoors, plein air painting, many painters eventually used excursions just to make sketches and completed their work in the controlled environment of a studio. Miss Florence rented private studios to her boarders for as little as $5 per month. Next week we will look at a handful of paintings from the second-floor galleries in the Griswold Museum. DianeDurantewriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.